finally putting America first. First, we'll invest in the American worker. We will breathe new life into your very rundown highways, railways, and waterways. We'll transform our roads and bridges from a source of endless frustration into a source of absolutely incredible pride. I've asked Republicans and Democrats in Congress to come together and deliver the biggest and boldest infrastructure plan in the last half-century. The plan generates an unprecedented $1.5 trillion investment in American infrastructure.
Well, the president in Ohio with this plan on infrastructure, kind of laying that out in a very campaign-style speech for President Trump. The bullet points here: $200 billion in federal funding to spur, as he mentioned, $1.5 trillion in infrastructure investments, kind of a public-private partnership, $100 billion for an incentives program for additional investments, states, localities, private sector, $50 billion rebuilding rural infrastructure, $20 billion promoting infrastructure projects, $20 billion expanding the financing programs, $10 billion in capital revolving fund to help reduce inefficient federal property leasing. What about this? Let's bring in our panel. Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And Bill McGurn, mainstream columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Bill, realistic?
It's a little realistic. Look, the problem isn't can we build this stuff. There's two problems. Who's going to pay for it, and can we get permission to build it from the regulatory process? So those are the areas, I think, where the president could have a little more impact. You know, we need a reform of how it's done. In New York and New Jersey, for example, so much of this should have been done by the local and state governments, but because of the spending problems that they don't have the money for it.
Yeah, Susan?
Well, I think that there are some cities and states who see this as not a realistic prospect because it requires them to come up with so much of the money. You know, there's traditionally been an 80-20 federal-state split. This puts us the other way around. The federal government will be putting about 20% of the infrastructure spending. Now, that said, I think there is a bipartisan across the country consensus that we need to have a bigger investment in infrastructure, but I'm not sure the president's plan is one that is politically feasible, and I think the prospects that it gets through Congress this year are pretty slim.
Yeah, speaking of process, I mean, we just went through this omnibus, and I just talked to Governor Daniels about that. It doesn't seem like big legislative things are going to happen prior to the midterms. Do you agree with that, Katie?
Well, according to a White House senior official today, they're not looking for this to be a big infrastructure plan in terms of it being one big piece of legislation. They actually want to move this in parts. They want certain committees on Capitol Hill to take a look at the details and push them through individually. So I do think that there is a chance that some of these things can get passed in bites and pieces rather than in a bigger piece of legislation. But I want to go back quickly to the states issue. Yes, the states are going to have to take on a lot of the responsibility here. But you can also argue that because of that, there will be more accountability in terms of the types of projects that they do, and that they have to take a look at the things they actually need, rather than going back to the stimulus type package that we had with little accountability and all of the federal government money just getting dumped in for the sake of doing projects. States are going to have to take a look at what they actually need and make sure that the money that they are putting on the table and the money that they're getting from the federal government is well spent to better their infrastructure in their states.
I mean, clearly, Bill, there is a process that that is tough to go through if you're trying to do any big project in any state. That the hoops that you have to go through, that's what they're trying to affect.
Yeah, but back to Katie's point, I think it's a good point. You know, if the federal government's going to pick up most of the tab, there's not a lot of incentive for states to be careful about the money being spent. You know, in New York, of course, we have this issue with the Gateway project, the new tunnel, and you know, 9 out of 10 people who would use that are people like me, local commuters. And so I would think, why should someone in Mississippi have to pay for that or have to pay for the bulk of that? So I think we need, what would be nice is a lot of reform that creates incentives for states to focus on what they really need and start to pay for it themselves.
Donald Trump, the president today, had one company in his sights. He tweeted out, "I have stated my concerns with Amazon long before the election. Unlike others, they pay little or no taxes to state and local governments, use our postal system as their delivery boy, causing tremendous loss to the U.S., and are putting many thousands of retailers out of business." Susan, it seems like he has Amazon perhaps in his sights.
He does, and there may be a variety of reasons why. He's criticized Amazon before and linked Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, with the Washington Post, which he also owns. And that some people think that is part of his motivation for taking on Amazon. It is true that Amazon has been disruptive for a lot of small businesses in communities, and that's a fair conversation to have. It is not accurate to say that Amazon does not collect sales tax, however. Since last April of 2017, so for the last year, Amazon has had a policy of collecting sales tax wherever there are communities where sales tax, states where sales tax is levied. So that's a criticism that used to be made against Amazon that I think is now a little out of date.
Here's Steve Forbes asked about this kind of focusing in on one company, a big company, Amazon.
Free markets will work in bringing that company down just as it does with any other company over time. I'm old enough to remember GM when that was the big bad company, IBM when that was the big bad company.
And
Microsoft was going to take over the world. Walmart was going to take over the world, now is struggling. So we'll let the free markets play out.
Katie.
Yeah, I understand the president's willingness and urge to level the playing field, certainly. But if he's going after Jeff Bezos and Amazon for personal reasons, then it's certainly an abuse of power. Look, states have taken this on themselves in terms of looking at the way that Amazon does third-party sales and implemented their own types of sales tax. So I also believe that the free market will come into play here. The other thing, too, is there is Supreme Court precedent for this going back to the 1990s when catalogs were selling goods from state to state, and sales tax was not being paid in states that they were not actually located. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the catalogs. Now, Amazon is a little bit different, and the Supreme Court will hear a case in April dealing with the tech side of that. But we have seen that this is not just an Amazon issue. There is some legal precedent here about the taxes and the way that they work when you're selling from a third party or from a different state.
A lot of states and cities are courting Amazon for a big,
Right.
building somewhere. We'll see where that goes. Panel, as always, thank you.